What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. In this video, we take a look at the offensive linemen set to hit free agency in the CFL in 2023. But quickly, before we get started, I just wanted to say this is not really a CFL related note, but just a football related note in general. Tom Brady, as of the recording of this video, announced his retirement today for the second time. Retired, obviously, last year and then decided to come back. But this time, I think he's retired for good. What a career. Probably the greatest football player that's ever existed. Congratulations, Tom Brady, on a remarkable NFL career. And with that said, let's get started. So, as is often the case in free agency in either the NFL or CFL, a lot of the quality offensive linemen don't actually end up reaching the market because once you have a good player at this position, you often want to retain them, and often that's a high priority for teams to retain those guys. So I think the free agent market this year in the CFL reflects that, but we do have quite a few players still available that I think that could make a big impact for teams going into this season. And with that in mind, let's just get into the list here. I've divided it into two different groups: tackles and interior offensive linemen, because I think the skill sets are a lot different and the players that fill those roles are a lot different. And I think the depth is quite a bit bigger at the interior spot, much less so at the tackle spot in the CFL. Much harder position to play, in my opinion. With that in mind, let's get started with the tackles set to hit free agency this offseason. And the number one guy I think that is set to hit free agency now that Derek Dennis recently re-signed with Calgary is Joel Figueroa of the BC Lions. Now, Figueroa is getting up there in age. He's a very veteran offensive lineman. I believe he's been in the CFL since 2013. But he has had a little bit of a renaissance the past couple of years with the BC Lions, especially this past season, blocking for Nathan Rourke. And I think that he still has a lot to offer CFL teams as that left tackle. I think that, BC will be very interested in retaining him. But if not, I think a reunion potentially in Hamilton, where he began his career, could potentially be in the cards. They'll be looking for potentially a left tackle this offseason. So it should be very, very interesting to see what happens with Joel Figueroa. Like I said, there's not many quality tackles out there, so I think that, he will be a guy that goes to the highest bidder, and there should be a lot of interest in him around the league. Then at number 2, I have Colin Kelly of the Hamilton Tiger Cats. He is a very interesting player because he was traded midway through last season from the Edmonton Elks to the Hamilton Tiger Cats, and he, throughout his entire career, mostly played right tackle, but the Tiger Cats had a need at left tackle and converted him to left tackle for the rest of the season, where he did a very good job, all things considered, learning a new position in his pro career. And I think that, going forward, it should be interesting if teams view him as a left tackle going forward or a right tackle. Do the Tiger Cats want him back as their starting left tackle this season? Should be very interesting to see what kind of contract he gets on the open market if he reaches there. But I think that a team that obviously needs a lot of O-line help is the Saskatchewan Roughriders, particularly at that right tackle spot. So if he goes and resumes his position as, like what he played most of his career at right tackle, I think Saskatchewan makes a lot of sense for him. Hamilton, I think, maybe still the favorite to still sign him because that offensive line was playing very well towards the end of last season after having a rough start to the year. So at the end of the day, I do think he probably stays in Hamilton, but I think if he leaves, Saskatchewan's at the top of the list, and they'll be very aggressive trying to fix their offensive line issues from last season. Now moving on to number 3, we have Eucombre Williams of the Ottawa Red Blacks, and he's a very interesting player because he brings a lot of versatility to the table. He has started anywhere from center to left tackle in his career, and I think the big question for him, and why I have a question mark next to Ottawa, it's kind of hard to see, is he going to retire this offseason? And there's been some speculation. He's getting up there in age, so it should be interesting to see if he continues his CFL career. I think if he does decide to play, he is a better player than Colin Kelly, in my opinion. But just because of those question marks, I ranked him at number 3. I think Ottawa will be very interested in bringing him back. He could help a number of teams, I think, because of that versatility. Obviously he could be a starting left tackle in this league, but also a starting center. So should be interesting to see what Comrie Williams does in free agency. And then at 4 and 5 here, it starts to get really thin here at the tackle position. At number 4, I went with Jamal Campbell of the Saskatchewan Roughriders. Didn't start most of the season after being a cap casualty from the Toronto Argonauts, and then signed late with the Saskatchewan Roughriders and never really got into too much of a rhythm for them. But I think when he's at his best, he can be one of the few Canadians that is capable of starting at tackle in the CFL. Played for a few years with the Toronto Argonauts. They invested a lot of time into developing him into a decent right tackle. So should be very interesting to see where Jamal Campbell ends up in free agency. I put Edmonton as a potential fit for him. I think that they could just use more Canadian talent on that offensive line in general. He would be a veteran piece there. Maybe that's a fit for him, but should be interesting to see where he ends up. He's the top Canadian tackle in this free agent class, in my opinion. And then at number 5, you can go a number of different ways, and we'll go over the other tackles that are available here in a second. But I went with Chris Schluger of the Montreal Alouettes. And he's basically just a replacement level guy, in my opinion, but I think he played his best football this past season for Montreal, emerged as a full-time starter. So should be interesting to see if Montreal retains him. I think Montreal, a lot of questions about what's going to happen with a number of those guys that are pending free agents for that team, but I think they need to retain that offensive line continuity. So I think Schluger most likely goes back to Montreal at the end of the day, but I think, just seeing as how he played last season, I think he's deserving of being the 5th-ranked tackle here going into free agency. And then quickly, here are the other tackles set to hit free agency. We have Randy Richards of the Ottawa Redblacks, Josiah St. John of the Saskatchewan Roughriders, former number 1 overall pick in the CFL draft. Never quite lived up to expectations, but has carved out a pretty solid career there. And then Tony Washington of the Edmonton Elks, another guy that, like Comrie Williams, don't know if he's going to play another year in the CFL. I think he's like 35, 36 years old, so, it may be time for him to hang him up. But I think if he plays, he'd have a fit somewhere in the league. But those are just the tackles available this offseason. And then moving on to the interior offensive lineman here. At number 1, I have Michael Couture of the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. And he's a guy that primarily plays the center position, has been very successful at that the past couple of years in Winnipeg. And I think that he has probably the highest upside of all the guys, I think, on this list at the interior offensive line position. He is a younger player still, in the prime of his career. And I think a fit for him is going back home to BC and playing for the BC Lions. I think he played at Simon Fraser University. So I think that would be a really good fit for him. At number 2, I have Suk Chung of the BC Lions. And I think Chung is a guy that, he was a big acquisition in free agency for the Lions in 2019, I believe it was. But I think overall, he's kind of failed to live up to the big expectations he had when he was brought on board there. He did have his best year this past year in 2022, but it will be interesting to see if he, because he played so well last year, did he price himself out of the market for BC because they'll have a number of guys to pay on that roster. So I put Saskatchewan as the number 1 destination for him. I think Saskatchewan just needs help all throughout that offensive line, and I think that's probably the most likely scenario. They're going to get a couple of these big-name free agents in the offensive line position, I have no doubt. And then at number 3, I have Darius Sirocco of the Ottawa Redblacks. And Sirocco signed a 1-year deal this past year in Ottawa and was pretty solid. I don't think it lived up to how he played the past couple years, the previous 2 years, I should say, in Hamilton. But I do think he's a guy that brings a little bit of versatility to the table, can play a little bit of center, can play a little bit of guard on either side of the line. So, I think he'll be a very sought-after guy, another guy that's in the prime of his career. He can go a number of different ways, I think, but I put down Toronto, Ottawa, and Hamilton. Return to Ottawa makes sense, given the fact that he was just there for 1 year, and again, has that connection with Sean Burke, like a lot of Ottawa Redblacks that came on board last season do. But I think Toronto, they secretly had some issues, I think, on that interior offensive line, so they may look to upgrade and steal it off a division rival here. And then Hamilton, because he played at the start of his career, and I believe he's a Burlington native, I could see him coming back to Hamilton. But I think maybe that's probably a long shot because I think they're pretty settled in terms of the guys they have there on the interior. And then moving on to number 4, we have Hunter Stewart of the Ottawa Red Blacks, another guy that has a little bit of versatility to play some center, some guard, even some tackle at certain points of his career. But it's just a really solid veteran offensive lineman that I don't think has a ton of upside at this point of his career, but he does have a solid floor and can help a team in a number of different spots, like I said. I think the options for him are potentially going to Edmonton, where they need, just some upgrades, I think, in terms of raising the floor of that offensive line, and that Canadian talent in general on the offensive line. And then I think maybe Montreal could use another quality veteran there on the offensive line as well. But I think a return to Ottawa, I would not rule that out as well. Maybe BC, if they lose Suk Chung in free agency, he goes back there where he spent the first number of years of his career. But I think Hunter Stewart, another name to watch out for in free agency here. And then at number 5, I had Dan Clark of the Saskatchewan Roughriders, longtime CFL lineman that was coming off a major injury this past season, did come back towards the end of the season, I do believe, if I recall correctly. But up there in age, if he wasn't up there in age, I think he would be much higher on this list for me. But I don't see him leaving Saskatchewan at this point of his career. It's where he spent his entire career. He just seems like a Saskatchewan Roughrider for life, and I think he will be back with the Roughriders as still that linchpin on that offensive line at that center position. And then finally, in terms of notable interior offensive linemen that weren't on my top 5, Philip Blake of the Toronto Argonauts, who technically can play a little bit of tackle as well, but at this point of his career, I think he's best suited as a guard. Played a lot of left tackle for them last season, but struggled at times when he was asked to play that role. So he's a guy to watch out for. I think Toronto would like to have him back, but at the right price and in the right situation, depending on how it shakes out with their other free agents. Justin Lawrence is one of those free agents that the Argos have as well that I think he struggled a lot last season when given the opportunity. Came over from Calgary and just had a bigger role with the Argos than he did in Calgary, but he just didn't really live up to that, in my opinion. But he'll find some role somewhere else in the CFL, I have no doubt. And then Kay Okafor of the Hamilton Tiger Cats. Technically, he was converted to defensive line, I do believe, somewhere in the middle of last season, so I probably shouldn't have even have him here as an offensive lineman. He's really struggled when he has seen the field in the CFL on the offensive line, so it's no wonder he has switched to defensive line. And then the final guy I have here is Peter Godber of the BC Lions. Their starting center the past couple of years here for the Lions. And I thought he had a really rough 2021, but in 2022 he was much improved and finally lived up to that first round pick billing that the Lions invested a few years back. So, I think there's some interesting pieces here available on the offensive line in free agency. Certainly not the most deep position available this offseason in the CFL. So, if teams have a serious need on the offensive line, they're going to have to fill their needs fast because there's not many quality guys here available, in my opinion, especially at the tackle position, like I said. But you guys will just have to let me know what you guys think down in the comment section below. And with that said, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.